Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I trust everyone had a really good week. Probably a busy week. Weather's been fantastic, and looks like we're having spring, but we know it ain't gonna last. So get ready for winter time. Well, today I wanted to talk about America. Talk about what will become of America. And I guess like I do sometimes, maybe many times, I start out with a question, who will save America? And of course you might come back and say, well, does America need saving? I think America is in trouble and does need saving. I think we're on a very bad path and have been for some time, but with some reprieves. We had relatively good years, and under President Trump, we seem to be making good progress, especially in many ways, even in somewhat spiritual ways. At least we had a leader that would invoke the name of Christ, was not afraid to do that. But now we find ourselves going in a very opposite direction. And I think America is in trouble, does need saving. And of course, we think, who will save America? Will the Republicans sweep to power in 2022 and take over the House and Senate? That could happen, might happen, and it has happened before. But what will come of it? We see a lot of we've seen short-term improvements, but it doesn't last. We go to the left, we go to the right. Will former President Trump become president in 2024 and lead America back from what I call our culture of death and sin, of course. Death seems to be celebrated in some respect. Certainly not life. They don't like right to life. They want choice, the choice of death, I guess. If so, will we stay in tune to our founding principles and God's law? Seems like we never do for any length of time. Will we, question after question, will we throw off the barbaric practice of abortion and some other, perversion laws that we have? It seems to favor perversions and laws that weaken our families. And will we get rid of those practices, or merely maybe hold them up for a little while? Be nice if we could get past them and cleanse our nation. But when I think of cleansing the nation, I think of kind of God's work. That's His work. We seek His face. We have faith, we seek His face, we turn from our sins, and He cleanses the nation. So, as many questions and no answers so far, really. And we don't know what will happen in the short term, and by short term I mean the next 4 years, the next 10 or 20 years. But I think we can know for certain that there are answers to these questions, and they will happen. And just as a short group of answers, let's turn to Zechariah chapter 2 and just read that. And I think we'll see what God has, what His plans are in the future, maybe not too distant future, we don't know. But I think we can be certain that they are plans that will stand up. Maybe I better put on my glasses. Chapter 2, verse 1. And here Zechariah I believe he's having a vision. He said, "Then I looked up, and there before me was a man with a measuring line in his hand." Verse 2, I asked, "Where are you going?" He answered me, "To measure Jerusalem, to find out how wide and how long it is." Then he, or the angel who was speaking to me, left, and another angel came to meet him. And he said, Run, tell that young man, Jerusalem will be a city without walls, because of the great number of men and livestock in it. And I myself will be a wall of fire around it, declares the Lord, and I will be its glory within. Verse 6 says, Come, come, flee from the land of the north, declares the Lord, for I have scattered you to the four winds of heaven, declares the Lord. And of course, when Israel was scattered, they were scattered to the north. So we can see this is a prophecy for the future. How far in the future we don't know, but it seems like maybe not that far. It says, verse 7, Come, O Zion, escape, you who live in the daughter of Babylon, for this is what the Lord Almighty says. After he has honored me and has sent me against the nations that have plundered you, for whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye, the apple of God's eye. It's kind of comforting to know that God considers Israel the apple of his eye and very protective. I will surely raise my hand against them so that their slaves will plunder them. Then you know that the Lord Almighty has sent me. Verse 10, Shout and be glad, O daughter of Zion, for I am coming, and I will live among you. Quite interesting. He intends to come and live among us. Many nations will be joined with the Lord in that day and will become my people. I will live among you, and you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. The Lord will inherit Judah as his portion in the Holy Land and will again choose Jerusalem. So he's not coming to New York City or Beijing or London. But still, be still before the Lord, all mankind, because he has raised himself from his holy dwelling. It's a pretty short chapter, but it says quite a bit. And chapter 3 carries on with that thought. Verse 1, he says, Then he showed me Joshua. And when I look at my footnote down here where it says a variant of Yeshua, which was the name of Christ. He showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right side to accuse him. The Lord said to Satan, The Lord rebuke you, Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this man a burning stick snatched from the fire? Some would say a burning brand snatched from the fire. It says, Joshua was dressed in filthy clothes as he stood before the angel. The angel said to those who were standing before him, Take off his filthy clothes. Then he said to Joshua, See, I have taken away your sin, and I will put rich garments on you. Then I said, Put a clean turban on his head. So they put a clean turban on his head and clothed him with it, while the angel of the Lord stood by. Verse 6, The angel of the Lord gave this charge to Joshua. This is what the Lord Almighty says, If you will walk in my ways and keep my, it says requirements here, I think some version says commandments, then you will govern my house and have charge of my courts, and I will give you a place among those standing here. And verse 8, Listen, O high priest Joshua, and your associates seated before you, who are men symbolic of things to come. I'm going to bring my servant, the branch. See the stone I have set in front of Joshua. There are 7 eyes on that stone, and I will engrave an inscription on it, says the Lord Almighty, and I will remove the sin of the land in a single day. Quite interesting. Verse 10, In that day each of you will invite his neighbors to sit under his vine and fig tree, declares the Lord Almighty. So we can see that evil is not going to triumph forever. Let's turn over to chapter 8, and I think that will be the last chapter. In the caption to this chapter is the Lord promises to bless Jerusalem. Verse 1, again the word of the Lord Almighty came to me. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I am very jealous for Zion. I am burning with jealousy for her. This is what the Lord says. I will return to Zion and dwell in Jerusalem. Then Jerusalem will be called the city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord Almighty will be called the holy mountain. Verse 4, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Once again, men and women of ripe old age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each with cane in hand because of his age. And the city streets will be filled with boys and girls playing there. That's quite interesting, quite encouraging, and it sounds like they won't maybe be having all kind of electronic devices, staying in their house looking at electronic devices. And old men and women. So there'll be physical people there for sure. This is what the Lord Almighty says. It may seem marvelous to the remnant of the people at that time, but it will seem marvelous to me, declares the Lord. I got that wrong. It says, but will it seem marvelous to me? This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will save my people from the countries of the east and the west. I will bring them back to live in Jerusalem. They will be my people, and I will be faithful and righteous to them as their God. Verse 9, this is what the Lord Almighty says. You who hear these words spoken by the prophets, who were there when the foundation was laid for the house of the Lord Almighty, let your hands be strong so that the temple may be built. Before that time there were no wages for man or beast. No one could go about the business safely because of his enemy. For I had turned every man against his neighbor, but now I will not deal with the remnant of the people as I did in the past, declares the Lord Almighty. Verse 12, it says, the seed will grow well, the vine will yield its fruit, the grounds will produce its crops, and the heavens will drop their dew. I will give all these things as an inheritance to the remnant of this people. As you have been an object of cursing among the nations, O Judah and Israel, so will I save you, and you will be a blessing. Do not be afraid, but let your hands be strong. And down in verse 20, it says, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Many peoples and the inhabitants of many cities will come, and the inhabitants of one city will go to another city and say, let us go at once to entreat the Lord and seek the Lord Almighty. I myself am going, and many people and powerful nations will come to Jerusalem to seek the Lord Almighty and to entreat him. In verse 23, I think that's the last verse, this is what the Lord Almighty says. In those days, 10 men from all languages and nations will take firm hold of one Jew by the hem of his robe and say, Let's go with you, because we have heard that the Lord is with you. So regardless of what we do now, what the near future brings, who we elect, we can look forward in the future to a perfect government. Thank you.
The title of this message is The Anchor Holds. I know that's a famous song, The Anchor Holds. The question, will we hold on to the anchor, the spiritual anchor? One of the biggest blunders of Israel's history was when Jeroboam, in a sense, really canceled the anchor that locked the northern 10 tribes to the true religion of the true God. And really the lifeguards, the Levitical priest, he cut them loose too, sort of like cutting your lifeboat as well. And they drifted off into, let's say, counterfeit religion, and they never had a revival, a good king. They went from bad, really bad, the worst ever. That's pretty much the history of the Northern 10. 1 Kings 12:32. 1 Kings 12:32. Jeroboam ordained a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month. Some people think that's where Oktoberfest had its original roots, but regardless, he came up with counterfeit feast days, which he had devised in his own heart. In other words, they weren't based on anything God had written, said. He did it for political reasons. He reasoned that even though God promised him he could have a throne like David's, he didn't have the faith. He said, Israel has a central religion built around the temple in Jerusalem. That may make me politically vulnerable, so they did the human political thing. He created a counterfeit religion. Now, I'm going to mention Christmas. I'm not saying Christmas is exactly the same as what Jeroboam did, but I just want to let us know that we are right not to keep Christmas. It's a counterfeit holy day. I mean, Christ was really born, and Luke, the first couple chapters, is correct if you hear it quoted today or yesterday sometime. But Christmas is a counterfeit birthday for Christ. But interesting, the world, now I'm giving my opinion, and we discussed this on the pod last night too. The world has shifted, and now I know higher education did it 12 years ago. They shifted from saying Christmas or Easter break to holiday season or winter solstice. Well, holiday season or spring break or winter solstice actually is worse. You're like kicking the name of God out totally. And now they wouldn't see it this way, of course, when they say winter season. They're getting God's name out. And by the way, and there are a lot of atheist humanists in the leadership of American media, American companies, American government. They want God out of everything. Period. We don't even want to counterfeit Christ in the public square. Keep it only in your churches, and even there we want to squish it as much as we can. So I think it's worse. But I could be wrong. Some people don't think so. They say, well, Christ had no business any of this anyway. But instead of being an internecine debate among Christians about what's the right date for his birthday, they want to get rid of the whole thing. They say Christ and God out of everything. I think it's worse, but we all have our own opinions. They want no God, no way, no how in the public square. But one thing we are right. I'm going to give you two reasons why today is not the birthday of Christ. First is, Luke, being a good historian, gives us clues to calculate the general season when Christ was born. And these clues are pretty clear. And really, good Bible scholars do not doubt that the reason December 25th was chosen, it was the date of the Saturnalia, and when they wanted to turn the Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Empire and be in Christianity or Roman Catholicism, the Universal Church, as the official church of the Holy Roman Empire, it was easier to just let the pagans keep the same days, pretty much the same customs. We'll just put a new label on it. And that's when the sun comes back up higher in the horizon. It's down, right about now, or a few days before it starts back up. And by the way, everybody agrees. They didn't pick it because they had some document showing Christ was born on December 25th. But anyway, Luke 1:5. There was in the days of Herod a certain priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah. And when you go into Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 24, you'll find that's the 8th one. And they start because Jewish holy day calendar starts in March. The 8th one takes you to June or possibly the 1st of July. And at that time, he was told by an angel that he would, even though he was an elderly man and his wife was elderly, they would have a miracle child, just like all the others in the Bible, Abraham, Isaac, same principle, and they would make that child very special, just like in the case of Abraham and Isaac, and that was John the Baptist. Luke 1:24. Now after those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived. That's after that priesthood I just mentioned, which would be June or possibly the 1st of July. She had a baby. She hid herself 5 months. Verse 26. Now in the 6th month of this process of her having the baby, an angel Gabriel went to Galilee and appeared to a virgin named Mary and told her, "You're now with a child." And by the way, if you read the whole story, the two women got together, and John the Baptist, as a fetus, celebrated being in the presence of Christ, a fetus. But they're 6 months apart. That's the key thing. 6 months apart. That's the key factor. So, if John the Baptist got impregnated in June or possibly the 1st of July, then John the Baptist would have been born 9 months later in March or possibly the 1st of April. And if Christ were 6 months younger, you extend out 6 months from March, April, you get September, October. That's the fall holy days. And that's historically documented. Christ was born in the fall, probably the Feast of Trumpets, when he will come back, well, at least figuratively. It's an interesting thing. Obviously, we can't be sure of everything because God didn't give us exact dates, which meant he wants us to celebrate the holy days he's got. We're really focusing more on Christ's death and sacrifice and his second coming than on his birthday. But I'm still not diminishing his birthday, of course. I'm just saying that's what God wanted us to celebrate. It's interesting that when the angel came to Mary, she said, call him. Now, Joshua, I want to just clarify it. I know Carl mentioned it as well. But the angel said Joshua. But in the Greek, the word Joshua is Jesus. And English comes straight out of the Greek. It's just the way our educational system works. English is a newer language. So Jesus is actually the same as Joshua. That's why you see how the fitting of trumpets, Joshua blew the trumpets in the promised land and took over Canaan. Christ is coming back and going to blow the Feast of Trumpets and take over the world. But that's just speculation about the exact details. But one thing we know, Christ was born in the fall, not in the end of December, in a dead cold winter. In case some of you think, well, Jerusalem's the Middle East, it never gets cold there. Jerusalem is up on the top of Mount Zion. Because of the altitude, actually it snows in Jerusalem sometimes, it does. It's cold up there at night, it's an altitude thing. Even in warm California and the high Sierra Mountains, they have snow now. I mean, they're celebrating they got like a 20-inch snowfall because they have ski resorts up there. That's what they need badly. And also when it melts, it helps their water reserves later in the spring when it melts. But anyway, my point is it's cold. The second point I want to make that proves that Christ was not born December 25th, besides the historical records of the course of the priest, is also the shepherds were living outside. They would not live, and the sheep, they had barns, that's where the stable is. They don't have stables for nothing. When the winter, especially nighttime in the winter, it gets cold. They bring those sheep inside. And the shepherds don't sleep outside at night. In the dark, in the middle of a cold winter, that would be one way to get sick. Anyway, I'll read the scripture, but you all know it. Luke 2:7-8. She brought forth her first son, laid him in a manger, or we might call it a barn, because there's no room for them in the inn. Now there were in the same country shepherds living out in the field, keeping watch over their sheep by night. You don't go out at night in the wintertime. Even when you have a mild day, the nights are usually pretty cold. So those are two proofs that we are right. This date, December 25th, is a Saturnalia. It's a pagan counterfeit. You're doing the right thing by being here and not at a Christmas party. We all know it, but I just want to remind us of why it's true. So what are the anchors? The anchors are God's holy days. That includes the weekly Sabbath, the annual Sabbaths. I'm going to read Exodus 31:13. Most of us know this verse, but I just want to reiterate things we already know because it's important to remind ourselves of this. When the world is so overwhelming us with Christmas carols and Christmas gifts, and what's wrong with you all? You aren't Christian. You're not keeping Christmas. And I know that's what people think. Actually, we're more Christian than they are. They don't know it yet. They'll find out someday. Exodus 31:13. Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, surely my Sabbaths. And the S on the end of the word Sabbaths means it's plural. See, if it just said Sabbath, it'd be the weekly Sabbath. But Sabbath with an S means it includes the weekly Sabbath and the annual Sabbaths, which includes, unleavened bread, and and all that goes into the Passover celebration, Christ's death, Pentecost, and the fall holy days. And you shall keep. It is a sign between me and you throughout your generations. It's the anchor that has us connected to the true God. When you break that anchor by, as Jeroboam did, removing the holy days and the people that knew the Bible, it's like a ship in a harbor. Without an anchor, the current will push it out of harbor and usually into the shoals where there are dangerous rocks and bad things will happen. That's what happened to the nation of Israel, the northern 10. They lost their identity. We want to hold on tightly to God. We want external safety, but we also want spiritual safety. I know we know the story, but I'm going to tell it one more time. Get it on this tape, because I learned this from teaching. In the old days, they always taught about the turning point in the American Revolution was Washington's Christmas Day attack on Trenton, New Jersey. And there was that picture of him crossing the Delaware, with his cape on and standing up on a little small boat. And it's a great painting of Washington. Well, how did Washington know that the soldiers, mostly were Hessians, those German soldiers, how did he know they would be drunk today? How did he know that? Because he knew on Christmas Day in Europe, everybody gets drunk. Well, the Christmas Day, they got a horrible hangover. And those were good, very professional soldiers. Their centuries weren't ready. It was an easy victory. They were drunk. You would normally not get a victory over hardened professional German soldiers like that and British soldiers. And he went on after that victory at Trenton. He got the British 1 or 2 more times and actually drove them out of much of New Jersey. But the big thing was Washington had been losing the war because he just had volunteer army, and the British brought 300 of the line battleships and a big chunk of their army, and brought, as I said, thousands of German mercenary soldiers. They were outgunned and, in every way. And they defeated Washington, defeat after defeat, as they pushed him out of New Jersey, crossed the Delaware. And many of his recruits were going to leave. They only signed up for 1 year, and it was a losing. Nobody wants to be on the side of a loser. You'll find that true of coaches. When they start winning, everybody's on their side. When they're losing, they all rats leave a sinking ship. Well, after that victory, 15,000 people volunteered for Washington's army, and most of the guys who were going to leave stayed. It was a turning point in the war. You could argue that if the American colonists had been keeping Christmas, the American Revolution would have failed. And you all know the Puritans who were the major establishers of the American colonies were all, when they say Puritans, they meant worshiping the Bible as purely accurate as possible. We could argue about, they had different varieties of doctrines, but still, being that biblical, they clearly saw that Christmas was not biblical. And Christmas was outlawed until about 1840-something in most of America. And that's a fact. Most people don't know that. It was outlawed. So Washington's people weren't keeping Christmas. And he knew the other side would be drunk. It is smart of him, if you think about it. And he was desperate. That's probably the only way he had a chance to win. So I just want us to realize that this day actually represents a great victory for America. And you never think about the Trenton, New Jersey, crossing the Delaware victory for George Washington and the American Revolution. Okay, this joke is called a midnight call. Midnight call. A lawyer phoned the governor's mansion, middle of the night. He finally got one of the governor's assistants on the phone. And this young lawyer said, I got to talk to the governor. It's an emergency. I must talk to the governor. And the assistant said, look, it's middle of the night. Can't you wait till 8:30 or 9 in the morning? The governor is eating breakfast. No, I got to talk to him now. It's an emergency. And the governor is finally awakened, and he talks to the lawyer. And he said, well, what's the big emergency? He grumbled. Judge Pearson just died, said the young lawyer, and I want to take his place. Whoa. The governor was shocked. You woke me up for this? He said, well, it's okay with me if it's okay with the funeral home. Yeah, it's okay with the funeral home. But, you know, the point of that joke is misplaced judgment. He wanted that job so bad. But that's what happened to the Israelites when they put a counterfeit religion. They had golden calves. And I want to read 2 Chronicles, but there's a second part of that. We mentioned on the podcast last night, too. A second part of what he did, 2 Chronicles 11:14. And this is the second part. For the Levites left their common lands and their possessions and came to Judah and Jerusalem. That's from the 10 northern tribes. They went south. For Jeroboam and his sons had rejected them from serving. In other words, he told the Levites, you're out of here, boys. You're not going to be clerics and all the other, they're also health inspectors and judges. You're out of here. I'm putting my own people in those nice, cushy jobs. Get lost. From serving as priest. Then he appointed him priest for himself, and he put in the high places, like hilltops, demons and calf idols. Now, when it says demons, a good translation is, it looks like a goat with weird horns, and it looks like a devil, but I think it means idols, goat-like idols that look devilish, but they're really, what can I say? And actually, they put something like that, a goat-like devil-looking thing, next to the nativity scene in Chicago. I saw that a few days ago. I couldn't believe it. I know Chicago's gone off the deep edge. They're going off the deep edge spiritually in Chicago as well. Not just defunding the police and undermining bail laws, but... And it didn't get that much bad publicity in Chicago. Most of you probably never heard of it. Anyway, that's what he did. And this bad king, by getting rid of the Levites, he took Bible knowledge away from the Israelites because there weren't printed Bibles and scrolls were rare. So they were like walking Bibles. By the way, for much of the world's history, people memorized the Bible or parts of it. And there'd be a guy who would visit a church in the 1100s AD, and they said, he knows all the writings of John. He can repeat them verbatim with total accuracy, and that's what he could do. He'd repeat all of maybe John, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and then give a sermon about what he just said. And the Levites were supposed to memorize the law, the first 5 books of the Bible, and know all about all that inspection stuff that's all, and health stuff and health food and things that are in the Bible. They knew all about that, and they knew God's laws. So when you get rid of the Levites, it's like getting rid of the Bible in its day, and then the guys you replace often call lowest of men. That's how the King James translates it. You get guys who know nothing. They have no knowledge of the Bible, and they will teach anything Jeroboam says. They don't know the difference, right? He actually said, these golden calves, and I guess the goat one that's on the high mountaintops, they represent the God that led us out of Egypt. So he's trying to get to the original God, but in a counterfeit manner. And most of you know this, but I'm just going to repeat it. When you read Deuteronomy and Numbers, God reminds them that when he appeared to them on Mount Sinai in this giant smoking cloud and a fire, and his voice was booming like a waterfall and the earth was shaking, they actually didn't see God, just a glow in that smoky cloud that protected them from God's glow. But they didn't actually see his face or his form. And God and Moses reminded them that. So don't make any carvings, drawings, pictures, wood cuttings of what you think God looked like. People often wonder, why did God do that? Maybe we don't know the full answer, but in part, people have a tendency toward idolatry, taking some little object, and maybe it's got a picture of something or a coin with a picture on it, and you start thinking this is God, and you wear it around your neck, or you know what I mean. Plus, I don't think any artwork can picture the fullness and the greatness of God. I'm not saying they couldn't do, and nowadays with 3D photography, and they can do a better job, but even still, God has dimensions that you just can't put in art. Does that make sense? So God said, don't do it. Worship me in spirit and in truth, and don't make pictures, carvings, drawings. And so God intentionally did not show his form to anybody except Moses, and he only saw the backside of God, and glowed for weeks because of that. The point is, God didn't want that, but Jeroboam did it anyway. And you think about the golden calves are young bulls, and bulls are a source of power, and they're one of the major pagan symbols. Well, they are bulls, young calves, and same with the goat. All I can say is paganism is there, and basically, when the Roman Catholic Church became the official church of the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire influenced Christianity more. I mean, they both influenced each other. I'm not trying to say there was no Christian influence. But a lot of their basic principles, Chief Pontiff, that office existed before Constantine's time. Julius Caesar won that office in his political climb to power. Vestal Virgins, College of Cardinals, they all existed in the Roman Empire long before it became the official religion of the Holy Roman Empire. My point is, the world has been in a counterfeit Christianity. That's better than nothing. I'm not trying to take it away, but it's still not what God wants, because it's like that anchor. When you get rid of the Sabbath and the holy days, and you put in counterfeits and idols, even if you mean well, so I'm not saying people don't mean well, that anchor is broken, and like a ship, you start drifting downstream. And we all know, don't we all know this is Satan's world? Satan's age? And the drift is going to always be away from God, away from good, wholesome values, away from, you can see it in higher education, always drifts to the far left. The legal profession always drifts to the far left. Hollywood always drifts to the far left. Do you know that there was a time when they had a code in Hollywood? I'll call it a morality code. They didn't actually call it that, but they tried to put positive moral themes in most movies and avoid things that were negative. I mean, that's actually true. Some people complained about it in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And I'm not saying there weren't bad things there, but they weren't all that bad. They really weren't. You go back and look at even TV shows made in the 50s, it was just so much different. And nowadays, for example, the Writers Guild, which they're the ones that that influence movies and TV shows. I heard last year they or their union leaders or somebody was complaining that TV shows did not have a high enough percentage of LGBTQ plus. And it's more like whatever the plus, many other thing. And I think they were down to 10 or 20% of the characters would be. They want more than that. They want more than that. I think, wow. I'm still trying to get used to two men kissing on television. I know you're old-fashioned, but isn't that what we should be, right? So my point is the anchor, that is Bible and Bible principles. And maybe America and any place in the world, and since it's Satan's world, has never been as good as it should be, and there are bad people everywhere. North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, wherever else I forgot. And so obviously that's true in Satan's world. But in a relative sense, so I'm saying relative sense, the King James Bible came from England. Most of the missionary and charity money in the world comes from America and secondly Britain. I bet that'll surprise, and far, far away. Nobody's even close. The country that was founded, because when the Puritans came, for the most part, they used Bible principles. And I thought it was an interesting story. When the captain kicked them off the ship in Plymouth Rock, they were supposed to go further south where the weather was warmer because it was November and, in the middle of this big dark forest and the winter's coming out. He said, I don't care. The weather's too treacherous. I'm heading back to England. I'm kicking you all off. They said, well, who's going to be in charge? He said, that's your problem. And that, the Mayflower Compact, which is very biblical, they said, well, we will decide for ourselves. The people will choose our leaders. Now we might laugh and like, what's the big deal? In their world, that 1619, that was very unique. Kings and overlords made those decisions, and big time chieftains. But and that got the tradition, as Lincoln said, for the people, of the people, and by the people. I mean, I'm putting it all in context. And Thanksgiving, there are schools where even when they mention Thanksgiving, they don't say who the pilgrims were thankful for. They were thankful for God for them surviving. I know I've told this story before, but God brought them a translator, probably the only man on the planet who was both a Christian and spoke the Indian languages of that area, the Massasoit tribes, and the King's English, because he had lived in London for 14 years, and that's another story we can tell you later. But the point is, what a blessing that was for them to survive. So my point is, God has blessed America. We don't always see it, because when you're blessed, but what you'll find out is when foreigners come here, like people come here from Jamaica, from Nigeria, from Latin America, I've met some from places in Europe as well, mostly Eastern Europe. And they get to America and they see the supermarkets and you all are blessed and you don't even know you're blessed. Of all colors. And even a lot of immigrants from Asia and China, they want to come here. They're paying the cartels on the Mexican border thousands of dollars, crossing, and somewhat dangerous too, to get to America. We are blessed. We just don't realize we're blessed. And I know you're going to say, well, I got tons of debts and we're having economic problems and my kids are having drug problems. I admit there are problems, but relative to the rest of the world, we're still blessed. And what we need to do, and I wish our school systems would do more of it, and churches would do more of it, teach the next generation about God and the Bible more so, to keep that anchor held, because it looks bleak. But what Jeroboam found was a bunch of priests who did not know the Bible, who would teach anything for a buck, for a nice cushy position. And in those days, being a priest was a nice cushy position. Hosea 4:6. My people are destroyed, Hosea 6, for a lack of knowledge, because you rejected knowledge. And then God says they rejected God. And that was disaster for that nation. And so what we need to do is embrace as much Bible knowledge as we can. Because that's also an anchor. Bible knowledge is also an anchor. And my last scripture, we need Bible knowledge to save and help others. I want to read what James said about helping others. James 5:19 through 20. James 5:19. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death, and Peter says even from the fire, and cover a multitude of sins. In other words, God really will bless you if you can pull somebody back from the fire. If somebody's about to go back to the world, and I know the world has a big pull, and we're small, and the world has a lot of benefits they can give them. If you have the Bible knowledge and the spirit of encouragement, and you can't force anybody to come back, so beating them over the head, but if you can encourage them to pull back, I will argue that not only will God bless you, and it'll make you stronger spiritually, which is a good thing, but you might save them, and God will be happy for that. And doing that sort of thing will be good for us. And we believers can make the anchor whole for ourselves with Bible knowledge and a determination to encourage each other. And we can make the anchor whole for other believers as well. Okay,